This is wildlife biologist Eric Orff with my New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife YouTube channel. Here we are into early April. It's the 4th. And, well, we're doing well here in Epsom, just during this pandemic. Since I got back from Florida on, I think it was March 15th, we went grocery shopping on the 16th, and I have not been back into a grocery store since. My 96-year-old mother lives a mile down the road from me, and I have volunteered to be her caregiver during this time of crisis. So I am very much limiting what I do and where I go, and my wife and I have been her caregivers. My brother and sister and the rest of the family have agreed to stay distant, very distant. So that means I need to be really careful. So here I am, kind of stuck at home through this pandemic. But it got me thinking, I have witnessed pandemics before as a wildlife biologist. We think about this one, somebody in China, got mixed up with some animal and these animals gave us this disease. Yeah, I guess maybe that is the case. It's zoonosis that was transferred over to humans at some point in time over the last year. But I recall a couple of other pandemics that had struck our wildlife that were basically human-caused. The first actually began in the early 1980s. As the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department's fur bearer biologist, I attended annual meetings of the fur bearer biologists along the eastern coast, northeast from, I think Virginia up through the eastern Canadian provinces. So we would meet annually, and each state or province would host it from year to year. But I remember in the early 80s, this new disease had popped up in raccoons. I think it might have been Georgia or Florida, or this strange new rabies that was entering into the raccoons. How did it get it? It wasn't here before. Like this human pandemic, it has never been here before, so none of us are immune. And so it was to be that the raccoons were not immune either. So it began spreading northward in the early to mid-1980s. And I watched it, in these annual meetings. Well, this year Virginia had it, and the next year or so it was Pennsylvania, and a couple years later it was Connecticut. And basically I remember predicting within one or two towns in 1 or 2 months when it would hit New Hampshire. And it hit New Hampshire the spring of 1990. So the raccoon rabies swept in New Hampshire. And the best that could be determined is this new pandemic. It was a virus that had never been here on the North American continent before. Wiped out upwards of 90% of the raccoons over the next year or two. So the raccoons were basically almost gone. Didn't wipe them out, but it reduced their numbers by 80 or 90%. So how did this virus get here? Some of those southern states, you could bring animals from around the world, wild animals as well, I guess, pets, and harbor them. So who knows who brought this new rabies virus from where, but it was probably human introduced into the North American continent, and over the next decade to 15 years it swept northward and devastating the raccoon population. And it took close to a decade before the raccoons kind of bounced back. So do I think we have the raccoons we had before this virus? Probably not, because once it hits like this one, once it's here, it's never going to go away. So the raccoon numbers build up and then they die off again from the rabies. So here it is. We have 30 years later, we still have raccoon rabies in New Hampshire. They have built somewhat of a resistance to get it. So we are not down 90% of the raccoon numbers that we were in the early 1990s. And about a decade ago, another human-caused pandemic, and it was to our bats, called white nose syndrome, and it's actually a fungus. How did this get here? And it first erupted in caves in northern New York. And the general theory, which is a very good one, was that some spelunker, spelunker is a person who likes to explore caves, went to Europe where this fungus is endemic, and they brought it on their clothing and introduced it to caves in New York where there were bats which were not immune to it. So here again, this has happened to be not a virus but a fungus, but nevertheless, One, that there was absolutely no resistance in the bats because they'd never had it before. And when I talk to people from the Fish and Game Department who are continuing to survey bat numbers in the winter in some of these caves, and we had very few. They're actually old mines in New Hampshire that I actually in the 90s I helped go into these mines and count our bats. So if, a few thousand here and a few hundred there, depending on the mine and where it was. But you go into them now, they're empty. They're gone. These bats that were here by the thousands were wiped out by this pandemic that was introduced by humans to this continent. And it has since spread across North America. So bats from Virginia and Tennessee and across to the Midwest are all dying from white nose syndrome because some spelunker, was careless, went into a mine in Europe and brought this disease to North America. So we humans have spread pandemics throughout the wildlife, and we did it. It was us. So so I suggest pay attention, hunker down, stay at home, don't transmit the disease, and do the best you can. But there has been more than one pandemic here in New Hampshire the last 30 years. And we caused it to our wildlife, to our raccoons, and to our bats. We did it. And this one, well, who knows? But anyway, so hunker down, stay safe. Hey, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And good luck to you.